Well, last week, if you were here, and hey, thank you to all the brave people in the room, right? Way to go, guys. All right, just gotta say that. And to you online, you're not brave. You're just more intelligent. You make better decisions. You don't have fewer regrets. So last time, Greg suggested that we memorize an old Jewish proverb, and he did that because it reminds us to consider what's coming in life, not just what's right in front of us, which is hard for us as human beings, and to consider the ultimate, not just the immediate outcome of our decisions. Here's what that proverb says, just to kind of jog your memory. It says that the prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. Basically, when deciding what to do, wise or prudent people, they take into consideration the long-term results of their decisions. But simple, naive, foolish people, all basically the same word, not so much. They opt for now over later. Now, I wish that someone would have taught this to me every week as I was growing up, because I was a kid that grew up in the church. I wish someone would have taught this to me every week as a kid who grew up in the church. Because I, like some of you, maybe many of you, did not see danger coming and take refuge as a kid, as a teenager, as a 20-something, as a young married. And unfortunately, that list keeps going. I'm not sure that I was even looking for danger, but I am sure that I ignored lots of good advice. And here's what I do know, and maybe you've heard this before: time and truth, they walk hand in hand, and eventually I paid the penalties for those poor decisions that I made in life, which is why we're talking about this, because I think we're all in the same boat when it comes to this. And these 5 questions that we're going to introduce you to over these next few weeks, they are meant to slow us down, to create the perspective that we need to see danger coming and to avoid it. And so just to be clear and transparent here, all of this comes from a book that is written by Andy Stanley with the same exact title, right? Just to get it out here. And we're just letting you know, like, we're not trying to rip off his content. We're not trying to sell his books either, because really this series is meant to, it's designed to provide you with the content so that you don't have to buy or read the book if you don't want to. But if you like to work ahead, if you're that kid in class, please buy the book, read it, work ahead. You'll see where we're going. We would love for you to do that. But the big idea in this series, this is where we're headed, and we've talked about this already. The big idea in this series is the relationship between good questions and good decisions. Because in some ways, our decisions are no better than the questions that we ask or don't ask. In fact, I am convinced that if you will apply this to your life, if you will ask the questions that we're going to teach you, if you'll ask these 5 questions regularly, if you will then answer them honestly, which is the hard part, right? And we're going to talk about this today. This is kind of the main part of what we're talking about. And then if you will act on the honest answers to these questions, if you'll act on your answers to these 5 questions, you will make better decisions and you will live with fewer regrets. Your life will be better, and the people who look to you and depend on you, their lives will be better as well. Because let's face it, we aren't the only people impacted by our decisions, right? I don't know about you, but my parents worked to teach me this, and I've been working really hard to help my boys understand this as well. Because we're not the only people impacted by our regrets that come from decisions either. So the first question is what I want to share with you today, and Andy calls this question in his book, he calls it the integrity question. And to introduce you to it, I want to introduce you to someone. This person is the person who lies to me the most in my life. I'm not sure why I put up with him because of all the lies that he tells me, but this person is me. It's me. I am the biggest liar that I know. And it's funny for some of you, but for all of us, I know I'm not alone here. We all need to realize that the person who lies to us the most is the person that looks at us in the mirror every morning. Let me rub that in just a little bit. You, like me, have talked yourself into or sold yourself on every bad decision that you've ever made. Worse than that, you were the mastermind behind most of your regrettable financial, relational, professional, like academic and moral decisions in life. You, like me, have probably done more to undermine your success and progress than any other person on the planet. Now, of course, there were other pressures in life, right? There were people who were giving their input to you. There was marketing telling us what we need or what we deserve in life. But in the end, you and I, we decided. You see, we have this used car salesman living in our heads, and his voice sounds a lot like our own voices. And although his logic is mostly flawed and his sales pitches aren't very good, we fall for them anyway. And all of this means that the most difficult person to lead is the person in the mirror as well. We can't lead ourselves well as long as we're deceiving or lying to ourselves. I mean, have you ever tried to lead a liar? In a professional setting, you fire a liar. So today, I want to challenge you to fire the dishonest version of yourself and to hire a new you, an honest you who tells you the truth even when it makes you feel bad. Because experience teaches us that dishonesty erodes trust and belief in people. But in the same way, when we're dishonest with ourselves, we erode that credibility, that trust, that belief within ourselves for ourselves. And I know that sounds kind of weird, but stick with me here. Think about this. When we lie out loud, what do we immediately do inside in our heads? We justify the lie. And who do we justify the lie to? We justify it to ourselves. We have to. Otherwise, we're at odds with ourselves. So we create a narrative that justifies our lie or our half-truth, and then we choose to believe it, which is just nuts. But ask this question: why would we believe a narrative that we basically just made up? The non-clinical answer is, you're a sucker for you. You can convince yourself of just about anything, and I'm a sucker for me too. But as any person in AA, NA, CA, or CR will tell you, extreme honesty is the first rule of recovery. Full honesty with ourselves and others is the first step to getting better and making progress in life. To make better decisions and to avoid unnecessary regret, you have to tell yourself the truth, even if the truth makes you feel bad about yourself. Now, I realize what I'm going to say next runs against the grain of our current culture, but there are worse things than feeling bad about yourself. So, to make the best decisions, we have to be honest with ourselves, even if or when it makes us feel bad about ourselves. Or to restate that maybe a little more clearly, we'll never get where we need to be until we acknowledge where we actually are. You've probably heard that before. Besides, if you aren't honest about why you're choosing what you're choosing in life, it will be almost impossible to take responsibility for the outcome of that decision later. So, our first step is to just be honest with ourselves about the fact that we're not always honest with ourselves. Specifically, we have to tell ourselves the uncomfortable truth about why we choose to do what we do. Which leads us, at last, to the first of our 5 questions, the integrity question. The first question to ask any time that you're making a decision of any kind of consequence is, am I being honest with myself? You see, you owe it to yourself to be honest with yourself about the decisions and choices you make and why you do what you do. If you want to justify your decisions to other people, that's fine, I guess. But there's no win in justifying your decisions to yourself. So just tell yourself the truth. By the way, it helps to ask this question out loud to yourself, and it actually helps to ask it 2 or 3 times. It takes a while for us to break down. And on the second and beyond times of asking this question, you should add actually a word to this question. You should say, am I being honest with myself really? The reason we have to add really to this is because we are so prone to deceiving ourselves. Listen, we may not be good at selling things to other people, but when it comes to selling ourselves on bad ideas, we're amazing. And our greatest regrets are associated with things, with opportunities, and people that we have sold ourselves on. Think back to your last bad relationship decision. This may be a really long time ago for some of you, okay? But think back to your last bad relationship decision. You were in love or lust or something, whatever it was, you were in it. And your daddy warned you, and your grandma tried to warn you, and your best friend tried to warn you, but you assured them that you knew what you were doing. Now, looking back, you wonder, what was I doing? What was I doing? What was I thinking? And that's the problem. You weren't thinking. You were selling. You were selling yourself on that bad idea. The same is true for your most recent bad purchasing decision. Once you had your heart set on whatever it was over. It was like something took control of you, and the next thing you knew, you were handing a credit card over to someone that you didn't know to purchase something that you couldn't or shouldn't afford. And why? Why? Because you sold yourself. You sold yourself. So here's a tip. As soon as you start selling you on anything, you should hit pause. As soon as you start selling you on anything, you should hit pause, because we rarely have to sell ourselves on a good idea. When it comes to good ideas, we usually know, don't we? So let's stop with all the lying and the justifying and the selling and just tell yourself the unfiltered truth. Be honest with yourself. Really, you may hurt your own feelings, but in the end, you'll be better off. Lights will come on. And I know that can be terrifying, because light reveals things that were once unseen. But light is a disinfectant. The truth sanitizes us as well. So let's bring our narratives and our justifications and our excuses into the light, and we will make better decisions and have fewer regrets. Now, if we were wired to decide for what's best for us, everything that I've told you would be easy. In fact, everything I've said so far makes perfectly good sense to you. You've experienced it. And if it were the case that we were wired to make these good decisions for ourselves, we would be done here. In fact, I would just pray and say, now go and do it and make good decisions and live happy and healthy. But as it turns out, choosing what's best for us isn't what's natural to us. And everyone pretty much agrees that we come into this world with a propensity to sell ourselves on what we want to do rather than what we should do. Psychologists call this idea the confirmation bias. Confirmation bias. This is the tendency to open ourselves up to anything that confirms what we already think, believe, or desire. And it's the instinct to then reject anything to the contrary. Again, think back to that last bad relationship decision. You were warned, and it wasn't like you wouldn't listen to people. It was more like you couldn't listen. You just couldn't listen. That last recent bad purchase that you made, it's so clear now, but in the moment, not so much, right? Well, thousands of years ago, a Judean court advisor turned prophet made a similar observation about human beings. And before I get to that observation, I need to give us a little bit of helpful explanation and context of how this works for all humankind. And the context for all this observation is really, really important. So if you'll allow me, I know there are some people, I love history. I could nerd out on this for the rest of the day, but I'll keep it short and sweet and to the point for everybody. Okay, so let me give you a quick Jewish history lesson. Around 600 BC, Jeremiah, the author of the Old Testament Jewish writing called Jeremiah, very crazy name, right? Served as a professional coach or advisor to a series of Judean kings. The careers of these kings would have gone smoother, and their lives would have lasted longer had they listened to Jeremiah's advice. But of course, the advantage of being a king is that you don't have to listen to anyone's advice. So Jeremiah began his coaching career with the young King Jehoiakim. Now, at the time, Judah was paying an annual tribute to Babylon, who in return provided them with protection. This is your classic mafia plotline, okay? After 3 years, Jehoiakim decided that he would quit making those payments to Babylon. This meant that he unintentionally had declared loyalty to Babylon's arch rival, Egypt. When Jeremiah heard about Jehoiakim's decision, he begged him to change his mind. This wasn't just a bad decision. This was a dangerous decision. You see, the mighty king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, was already in a really bad mood because he had just been defeated by the Egyptians. Jeremiah rightly assumed that Nebuchadnezzar would love to find a place to take out his frustration. And not only was Jehoiakim's decision foolish and dangerous, Jeremiah assured Jehoiakim that his decision was in direct opposition to God's will as well. Judah was in the position that it was underneath of Babylon because that's where God wanted them at that time. But Jehoiakim didn't care. He had abandoned the ways of Judaism years before this. He was a merciless tyrant. If you go read about Jehoiakim, man, he was a merciless tyrant. His sexual appetites led him far from the moral prohibitions outlined in Jewish law. So he ignored Jeremiah. And sure enough, King Nebuchadnezzar did exactly what Jeremiah predicted. He came looking for his money. I mean, you've seen movies like this, right? Nebuchadnezzar cut off his food and water supplies for 3 months to weaken everybody in the city. And then Nebuchadnezzar's army entered the city, bound Jehoiakim in chains, and marched him back to Babylon and added him to his king collection. Some people collect coins or Pokemon cards. Nebuchadnezzar collected kings. What he did, whenever he conquered a territory, he would capture the king of that territory alive. He would take him back to Babylon and add him into his king collection. Then, on special occasions, he would bring his king collection out to show off to everybody. He would have all the kings bound in gold chains and parade them around. Each king would walk with his hand on the back of the king that was in front of him because King Nebuchadnezzar also had their eyes poked out. I just like that part. Back to the story. Before leaving Jerusalem, King Nebuchadnezzar then crowned Jehoiakim's son, Jehoiachin, to be the new king. He was 18 years old. But 3 months later, Nebuchadnezzar changed his mind, returned to Jerusalem, and added Jehoiachin to his king collection as well. But since every kingdom needs a king, Nebuchadnezzar appointed Jehoiachin's uncle, which is Jehoiakim's brother, Zedekiah, to be the new king. Zedekiah was 21. Now, what young King Zedekiah did not know is that he would be the last king of the southern province of Judah. Because like the kings before him, he did not listen to advice. Another Jewish proverb says that for lack of guidance, a nation falls, but victory is won through many advisors. Apparently, these guys were that absent that day of school. And so, one of the Jewish historians wrote this about Zedekiah in the Chronicles of the nation of Israel. He said, he being Zedekiah, did evil in the eyes of the Lord his God and did not humble himself before Jeremiah, the prophet. He did exactly what King Jehoiakim had done. He refused to pay tribute to Babylon. Jeremiah pleaded with Zedekiah to change his mind, telling him that this would not, turn out well, not end well for the king or his family or for the city. But kings will be kings. And when Jeremiah realized that Zedekiah wasn't listening, he took his message into the streets. Jeremiah encouraged the city and the citizens to open the gates to King Nebuchadnezzar when he showed up to just save themselves. Well, when Zedekiah found out that what Jeremiah was doing, he had Jeremiah locked away to just shut him up. Because Jeremiah was scaring everybody, and everyone should have been scared because sure enough, Nebuchadnezzar showed up at the gates of Jerusalem. He had his army surround the city, and then they just waited. Eventually, they starved everyone into submission, and when Zedekiah realized his mistake, he went and he got Jeremiah out, and he begged him to ask God to deliver the city. But Jeremiah assured him it was too late. Their fate was sealed. The only hope for them was to open the gates and to beg for mercy. But Zedekiah knew there would be zero mercy, no mercy. So he snuck out of the city at night with his bodyguard and with his family, which was just another bad decision. He was captured on the road. He was forced to watch as his children were butchered one by one right in front of him. And that was the last thing that King Zedekiah would ever see. He was blinded. He was chained. He was marched back to Babylon to join the king collection. The moral of this story is, the next time someone tells you that scripture is boring, tell them the story of Zedekiah. No, really. When you hear, read, or maybe even watch something like this play out in real life, you can't help but think, like, what were they thinking, right? How could anybody be so clueless? And fortunately for us, Jeremiah, who watched this entire tragedy play out in front of him, answers this question for us. He explains why we are all so prone to self-deception. Here's what he wrote. He said, the heart is deceitful and above all things. The heart is deceitful above all things. Your heart, my heart, your mama's heart, that little baby's heart, our hearts are deceitful above everything. And Jeremiah chose this adjective very carefully, because there's a difference between dishonest and deceitful. Dishonest is easier to spot than deceit. Dishonest is just straight up not honest, but deceit is difficult to detect. Deceit is a mixture of truth, half-truth, and untruth. You've met dishonest people who weren't shrewd enough to deceive you. But deceitful people, they're the dangerous people. And Jeremiah says, our hearts are deceitful and dangerous. You see, guys, we are the dangerous ones. We are the deceivers. It's why we're so convinced, and at times so convincing. We don't just lie to ourselves, we deceive ourselves. Here's how that works. Once my heart gets wrapped around something or someone, my heart sends a message to my brain and says, hey, brain, I want this. Go figure out a way to justify it. And our brains are smart. They know that it's difficult to justify a want, but it's not difficult to justify a need or something that we're convinced that we deserve. So the first thing the brain does is it upgrades the messaging. The brain says, I need this, or I deserve this. And once we're convinced that we need or deserve something, it's easy to sell ourselves on it. And then before long, we all have a list of justifications for buying it, drinking it, staying, leaving, starting, quitting, asking her out, inviting him in, any of those things. But the reasons that we use to sell ourselves, they aren't reasons. They're justifications. And in most instances, we know it, but we fall for it anyway. We are so easily deceived by our own hearts. And Jeremiah isn't done with this thought. He goes on, he says, the heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. There's no cure. Listen, guys, this is why follow your heart is the worst advice we give each other. What we're talking about here is a permanent condition. We don't outgrow this or get mature enough to avoid this. We can't fix this. This is a permanent condition that requires constant supervision and a proactive response. And Jeremiah wraps up this idea, these answers to all these questions by stating something that we've all experienced when it comes to this condition. Here's what he says at the end. He says, who can understand it? It's a great question, isn't it? Who can understand the heart? Which explains why we've all said at some point, I don't understand why I did what I just did. We don't know why we decide what we decide. This explains why we do the very thing that we tell other people not to do. It's why the person in the mirror lies to us, deceives us, and is so hard to lead. You won't tell you the truth unless you force yourself to. You've got to pin yourself against the wall, look you in the eye, and you have to ask, am I being honest with myself, really? And the sooner that we embrace this terrible fact about ourselves, that we are our heart is taking us, and the more suspicious and cautious we will be when the salesperson inside of us starts selling. So this week, I want to encourage you to have a heart-to-heart with yourself in the mirror. I want you to ask yourself out loud, and I want you to use your name. I want you to say, John, are you being honest with yourself, really? Am I being honest with me, really? Then tell yourself the truth, even if you don't plan to act on it. Listen, you owe it to yourself to know, even if it points you in a direction that you don't intend to go. Begin by being honest. It won't hurt to know, but what you don't know, what you refuse to know, and won't know if you don't ask the question, can and most times will hurt you. So be honest with yourself. Most people aren't, but you don't want to be most people anyways. So decide today, I will not lie to myself, even when the truth makes me feel bad about myself. Because there are worse things than feeling bad. Ask yourself, am I telling myself the truth or selling myself a regret? Am I telling myself the truth or selling myself a regret? Now, as we wrap up, I'd like to ask some questions to maybe get this started for some of you. And maybe none of these will fit your current circumstances, but maybe they will, or maybe it will trigger a question for you in your head. And then we're going to give you some space to evaluate what's going on inside of you. So, buckle up. Here we go. Why am I avoiding him really? Why am I postponing that conversation really? Why do I keep making excuses? Really? Why did I say yes to that thing? Really? Why did I choose to purchase or to lease that? Really? Why did I move in or why am I moving out? Really? Why won't I get help? Really? Why do I continue to go out with him or to go out with her? Really? Why am I filing for divorce? Really? Why am I taking that job or quitting that job? Really? What's the real reason I don't call my kids, or my mom, or my dad, or my brother or sister? Really? Why won't I tell her or tell him the truth about what's going on? Really? Listen, this is terrifying. This question will wreck your life if you ask it. But it has the potential to be clarifying and ultimately liberating and empowering. Be honest with yourself. It doesn't come naturally. But most things that are useful in our lives, they don't come naturally.